Hello everybody and welcome to part 5. In this part we're going to look at drawing text to the screen, okay? So we've been doing pretty well drawing our sprites to the screen. This time we're going to create an object that draws a score to the top of the screen. We're just going to draw a score in the top middle of the screen that's going to track a number that we will increase as we destroy enemies. Before we get started on that, there's one little issue I'd like to tackle with the game so far. If you're using the tutorial graphics, you're using these graphics that I'm using to follow along with this tutorial, you may have noticed that when the player turns at an angle, because of the way the sprite is rotated, it looks a little bit pixelated on the edges. You can notice it a little bit in the enemy sprites as well, and a bit in the bullet sprites, but there's something very, very simple we can do to fix this when we're using HD graphics. What you're going to want to do is come to Options and go to Windows, okay? And in Graphics, find an option that says Interpolate Colors Between Pixels. It's off by default in GameMaker Studio 2, but turn that on and click Apply. Click OK, run the game again, and what this does is it does as it describes. It interpolates the colors between the pixels, which smooths out some of those edges, especially when rotating HD graphics. And as you can see, this looks way smoother, much nicer now, and looks way better than what we had before, and the rotation is handled much smoother. The reason this is off by default, and especially if you're using pixel art or pixel perfect graphics, is it can lead to some undesired effects. Like if you're showing really sharp, crisp pixel art graphics, then you turning that option on might lead to some blurring as the game tries to sort of interpolate the colors between each pixels, which isn't what you want. But if you're using HD graphics like this, then you're going to want to leave that option on, because as you can see, it makes things look a lot better when they're rotated around. Okay. So now we can get started actually making our score object. We don't need a sprite for this object. This object's going to be kind of invisible, working in the background, other than the fact it's going to draw our actual text to the screen. So right click in Objects and hit Create and type obj_score. And as I said, we're not actually going to have a sprite for this, so just leave this set to no sprite. When you do that, it just the object is invisible and doesn't draw anything to the screen by default. Okay, and if you place it in the room, it just shows up as a little question mark icon, as we'll see later. But once you create this object, go ahead and click Add Event and click Create. Okay, so we want the Create event just when an instance of this object is made for the very first time. So I'm just going to press F12 just to clear this stuff from the edge of the screen and just drag this out just so we can really see what we're doing. And I'm going to drag in, first of all, in the create event, the assign variable action. I say first of all, this is actually the only action we need in the create event. We're just going to assign the variable the score to be 0. Now careful, because there is also a variable called score that's built into GameMaker, and that's a global scope variable, and it's actually pretty useful, especially in situations like this actually, where we only need one score variable. Because it's global in scope, it can be accessed by any particular object, at any time any instance can make use of it and change it without having to sort of refer to that object or use a with statement, or use the down arrow here to set applies to, and so on. But just to show you more about how those exact functions work with most other variables, and to give you a bit more flexibility in the future, we're going to create the score variable instead ourselves as a value we make, and not one that's built into GameMaker. So the score, and we're going to give it a value of 0 because you don't have any points to begin with, right? So once you've done that, and that's all we need for our create event, so go to add event, and this time find the draw event. Okay, so in draw there's lots of different ones, but don't worry about all these, we just want the simple draw event. Okay, so a draw event, now every object technically has a draw event even if you don't create one, and it's where the object draws itself to the screen. It'll draw its sprite. This object doesn't have a sprite, so it'll get skipped entirely, but for most instances, if you don't set a draw event and don't define anything in it, its draw event will actually look something like this, and it just has the draw self action, which just draws the sprite wherever the instance is in the room, and whatever its angle is, and whatever its alpha is, and so on and so forth. But if you create a draw event, then this default behavior gets overridden by whatever you decide to put here. Now we're not really overriding anything in this object because we don't have a sprite, but if we were to create a draw event in an object that has a sprite and we didn't ever call draw self or draw sprite, then the object wouldn't ever draw itself to the screen. Okay, so we're taking over control of how this object does any kind of drawing or rendering. So what we want to do in here is we want to draw a value to the screen. We want to draw our the score variable to the screen. So you can find this as draw value, just this giant letter T here. And as it says in the tooltip, it draws the specified value. It can be a string, number, or variable. It comes with an optional caption as well. You can just set that to be nothing just by sort of just leaving 2 quotation marks. But we'll say score and then do a colon and a space. Just so that we'll draw that text before the value itself, so it's labeled on the top of the screen. We'll just have score and then actually show what the score is. So the value we want to draw is the score, the variable we defined a minute ago. And our x coordinate, let's make it sort of half of our default screen width. So let's say, what's that going to be? That's 10245 12. X and a Y of 32. Some of you might already know what the problem with this is going to be, but we'll see that in a second. I'm just going to bring back the resource tree and go into the room now and do the most important step, which is a step I often forget when making these kind of objects, and actually place object score into the room. You'll see it comes up as this little question mark icon because it doesn't have a sprite assigned to it. It won't show up as that in the actual game world. It's just so that we can actually see where it is and where we've placed it in the editor. Okay, it won't actually appear as a question mark for having no sprite. So once you've actually done that and placed that in the game world, we can run the game and see this working. So as you can see, we have there at the top score 0, but there's a problem with this, and if we move off to the right, you can see it's going away. We've just given it coordinates that are room coordinates, and therefore like it draws in that position in the room, and it's not going to follow the camera around when we move off the edge of the screen. Also at the moment it doesn't actually track any score. We don't have a way of increasing our score, but we've not done anything. There's no reason why it would yet. Okay, so first of all, before we actually make it so the score increases as we kill these things, first thing we're going to do is make that score value actually follow the camera. It's a little bit of a complex process to do this, but just stick with me, it's not too bad. So go to object score now. Let's close away the room editor and this for now so we can just see a bit better. And what we want to do in this draw event is, okay, so at the moment we're drawing to an x of 512 and a y of 32. Instead of that, what we want to do is find out where our camera currently is and use the x coordinate and y coordinate of the top left of the camera in the game world, and find the width of that camera as well, and use that to determine where we should draw what these x and y values should be every frame dynamically, rather than just giving them hard values. So how do we do that? Well, if I scroll up here and find the common in action declare temp and drag that in, we want it to be above the draw value. What this allows us to do is, it's exactly the same as assign variable, exactly the same. The only difference is this variable is temporary. Okay, we create a temporary variable that only exists for the duration of this one run of this event. Okay, so every single frame these variables will get filled with a new value and then discarded at the end. Okay, it's very useful when you're creating just temporary variables or things you don't want to that you don't need to track and access from other things, because they're just a bit faster and more efficient than having a full-blown normal variable. Okay, so we're going to declare a temporary variable and we're going to call it VC. Okay, and that's going to stand for view camera. And then we're going to type in value, and stick with me here, view underscore, and you can see a few things come up that it thinks we might mean here, different things to do with the views and cameras. And we want view underscore camera, and in square brackets 0. Okay, now what this line does is it finds the ID of the camera assigned to view 0. It's the camera that's automatically created for us when we used the room editor to create the view that followed our player object around the screen. Okay, so it finds that particular camera. Now what are we going to do with that? Well, let's drag in another declare temp, And this one we're going to call CX, and that's going to stand for camera X position, okay? Or the X coordinate of our camera, the top left of our camera horizontally. And how do we get that? How do we get that value and put it in? Well, we use another function called camera underscore. You can see more things come up here. Get underscore view underscore X, okay? And then open a bracket, type VC, the temporary variable we just established, and then close the bracket. Okay, that gets the X coordinate of the camera that we specify in the brackets. Okay, and then it's going to put that into the word CX. So that could be any particular number. It could be 512. It will be when we're at the beginning of the game where the camera is just there by default, but it will change as we move off the edge of the screen, and that's what's important. So drag in another declare temp now, and this one's going to be for the Y coordinate. It's exactly the same, we just used the letter Y instead of X. So CY for this one, and in value, camera underscore get underscore view underscore Y, and in brackets, VC. Okay, exactly the same. Now, we've got those two values, so we know the coordinates of the top left of our screen at any point in time now, every single frame. But we also need to know how wide the view is, okay, at any time, so that we can actually position this value in the center. Now, technically, that's a hard value that we know. We know that's exactly 512 because our camera is 1024. But if we ever say we were developing the game, we wanted to change the size of that view or change the camera size, we wouldn't then have to we wouldn't then want to have to come back into this code and change that number around to be something else. So we want to put this in yet another, and this is the last one, don't worry, declare temp called CW, camera width, okay? And that's just going to be camera underscore get underscore view underscore width VC, okay? So using that camera we found at the start, we're just going to get the width of it in pixels and put it into CW. And now, once we've got all of those things, we can adjust the position where we're drawing the score. Okay, so we're going to draw to, instead of 512, we're going to draw to CX, that's our X position of our camera, plus, open bracket, a CW, which is the width of our camera, divided by 2, close bracket, okay? And then the Y position is just going to be CY, the Y position of our camera, plus 32, say, okay? 32 pixels down from the top of the screen. So we don't want it exactly at the top of the screen, or it'll look weird. Let's give it a bit of spacing, so we just add 32 pixels to that. Now we've done all those things, let's run the game and see exactly where this is drawing now. So see, it looks the same as before, but now you'll notice if we move off the screen, the text moves with us, okay? Because it's finding out dynamically where it needs to be. So the next thing I'm going to do is make it so this value actually changes, right? Okay, so we can go ahead and close this object now, bring back the resource tree and go to our enemy object, okay? You remember this step event where the enemy moves towards the player every frame, and if its hit points becomes less than or equal to 0, we destroy the enemy. Well, instead of just destroying the enemy, what we're also going to do is manipulate the variable in obj_score. So go to assign variable and drag that in just here above destroy instance, so it's still connected in this green line here. And we're going to assign the variable the score to relative 5, which means we're going to add 5 to the value. Okay, if we untick relative, it would just set it to 5, but if we tick relative, we're adding 5 to the variable. Okay. Now, obviously, object_enemy doesn't have this variable. Okay, we never established it here. It's established in obj_score. So in order to change that variable in that object, we need to manipulate it here. So click apply to a different instance in the top right and select obj_score. You see that turns pink to show that it's doing something to an instance other than this, to an object other than this object, okay? And that's really all there is to it. So if we go ahead and run the game now, And we should find that as we destroy enemies, our score increases. And if we get restarted, obviously on create, the score value is set to 0, so whenever we lose the game, it gets set back to 0. And that's that. Now, one last thing we want to cover here is that this doesn't look very pretty. Okay, it's using the default GameMaker font. So what we want to do is change that and make it look a bit more interesting. So the first thing we'll want to do is create a new font, okay? So that we don't have to use the default GameMaker font. So right click in fonts and hit create. And we're just going to call it FNT_score, okay? Just because it's the font we're going to use for our score. Select any font you want. I'm just going to use one that's, you know, built in so that something everyone has. I'll just use Verdana or something. I'll just use regular Verdana font, and I'm going to set the style to bold and the size to 24. You can do what you like, but those are the settings I'm going to use. I'm going to leave anti-aliasing mode on. You can turn that off, and you can see here sort of a preview of exactly how it will look in the game. So you can sort of test out exactly how it's going to look. And then once I've done that, I don't need to do anything else here, so I'm just going to close that down. Now I'm going to come back to obj_score. Just in the draw event that we were in previously, before we draw this value, we can use some of these actions in the drawing section of our toolbox to manipulate exactly how this text is drawn to the screen. So I'm going to use the set font action first of all. I'm going to drag that in. I'm going to close these down so I can see a bit better. And select the font that we just made, FNT_score. Okie doke. That will set the font to be FNT_score for all future drawing, okay? So if we ever want to change that again, we have to call this action again and change the font to something else. It doesn't just last for this event, it stays on until you change it in another event in some other object, okay? Once we've done that, and the same is true of all of these actions actually, I'm going to drag in the set text alignment action, okay? And this is just like if you've used Microsoft Word or any word editor really that allows you to change text alignment. So as whether the text is drawn from the left, from the center, or from the right. We're drawing this text in the top middle of our screen, so we want it to just sort of be center aligned in every way, really. We could set the V align to be top as well, I suppose. But it really doesn't matter, it's just whatever you happen to prefer. So the last thing I want to do is, now by default our draw color seems to be set to white, but I'm going to drag in a set draw color anyway, just in case we set the draw color in some other instance to be something else. Because as with set font, when you set a draw color, it sets that color for all future drawing actions you take. Okay, if I were to draw any shapes or fonts or text or anything, they'll all be whatever color was last set with the set draw color action. Okay, so I'm going to set draw color, and color of white by default is fine. That's what we want. So go ahead and run that now, and you'll find that we have a much bigger font showing our score in the top middle of the screen, and it increases by 5 with every enemy we destroy. And that's all there is for this tutorial. Join us on the next part, part 6, where we'll be looking at adding sounds to the game.